Hey, how's it going, everyone? When relating what we've been learning in this class to a prior class, I think the course that comes to mind the most is probably OB 354, because I think there are several overall conceptual relationships, even though they're not exact, that tie together to accomplish explaining the same objective. So I think I was going through the chapters that we had gone through in our book, and so one of the first things that caught my eye was learning about the external environment and the demographic and the different socioeconomic cultures and so on, and that was something that we learned a lot about in OB and organizational behavior. Was before. And it wasn't as much as entering in a market, but before entering an organization or setting up an organization that's handling different cultures or projects that are in different areas or in different countries, you evaluated that demographic, their different characteristics, and how they went about things to make sure that you're not acting in ways that are disrespectful or against socioeconomic norms. Or cultural norms, and so I think that ties in really well together. Another interesting thing was the industry analysis as far as bargaining power for bargaining of supplies and the power of buyers, and I think that relates a lot to the negotiation tactics that we learned in OB. Specifically, I remember talking about the situational strength theory and the influence tactics that we talked about and the different ways that you can persuade someone, and then different values and different characteristics that create dependence between one individual and another, and that creates this power, this idea of power between a buyer and a supplier, or however that may be, but there were specific characteristics that created power or dependence between one or the other. And then with that, going back on influence tactics that we learned in OB, there was positive influence tactics that you could use for persuasion, and there was negative ones, and first thing that came to my mind that we were learning about very recently was collusion. And obviously, if you can lure someone in with the idea of colluding and offering some sort of benefit, you can influence their behaviors or their actions, and obviously that would be something that would be negative. And then going back to power, I remember talking a lot in OB about power as well. And an abuse of power with managers and executives, and that kind of made me remember about opportunistic behaviors that we were just talking about, as far as shirking and people not focusing or spending as much time on their jobs, or wasting resources for their own benefit that we just talked about. Purchasing a jet, and I think those characteristics are an abuse of power for someone who is at a higher position that maybe than another employee. I think overall this ties together really well as far as the implications for managers and how their decisions affect an overall business and the strategy, and how they go about making decisions on a higher level. And there was connections to the types of risk in strategy, and I remember learning in OB about risk aversion and how to avoid risks, and we talked a lot about political risks and economic risks, and obviously what goes hand in hand is with those things is how to avoid a lot of those things. And one of those things also that I remember was from project management is that a lot of the class also was about avoiding risk.